Hello, my name is Barry Horrobin. I am not a veteran, but I am one of the many Canadians, like many of you, who is living a lifestyle that is the beneficiary directly of the service our veterans have brought to our country. I have a special story and a special history with our military background. Both my grandfather on my father's side and my father were veterans of significant conflicts that came before us. My grandfather, who was born in 1874, was a veteran of both the Boer War, which is more commonly known by many as the South African War, and he was also a veteran of World War I. What's interesting about that is those two wars were many, many years apart, and my grandfather was actually too young to serve in too young to serve in the Boer War and too old to serve in World War I, according to the standards of the army that he enlisted of the day, which was the British Army. But what's interesting is that at the tender age of 14, my grandfather snuck off without his parents' permission and enlisted in the British Army. And he served in South Africa, and he also served in India, which is where many of the battles of that war were staged. This sword was made by my grandfather when he was a young teenage boy to defend himself. Now, as I hold this sword, I have no idea how many people he may have used it on, so to speak, to defend himself or his colleagues in his regiment. I never got the chance to talk to my grandfather directly. He passed away 6 months after I was born, so I didn't get a chance to sit down with him and talk to him. I have accounts of his military heroics and his dealings by my dad, who is also no longer with me. But I know from seeing different pictures of him when he served in India and served in South Africa, this sword was in his hand in many of those instances. Now, my grandfather received a very special award when he returned from the Boer War. In 1903, Queen Victoria, who was the presiding monarchy at the time, had a grand ball, a grand gala, if you will, that recognized the service of all veterans of the British Army in the Boer War. And you were invited to this ball to attend, representing yourself. If you had died in conflict, your next of kin, whether it be your mother or father or your son or daughter, would go in your stead. Now, my grandfather survived, so he did attend the ball, and each of them was presented with this tin of chocolates, and you can see it says South Africa 1900, which is right around the time of that war. It spanned several years. It's autographed. The box is autographed by Queen Victoria, which makes it very special and very valuable to me personally and our family. We had it framed, and it's something that you had to have served in that war to have gotten. Either your parent or your child or yourself have gotten that. So it's very special to me. Here are the medals my grandfather earned, and the other half of that story, he was too young. He was 14 when he went into the Boer War, but he was 40 years old when he signed up to go into World War I in 1914. And the maximum age the British Army was taking at that time was 36. They knew he was too old. He just bold-faced lied to them and said, "I'm 36 years old." I have his enlistment card. I don't have it with me today to show you, but his enlistment card in 1914 for entering World War I says he's 36 years old, but I know he's 40 when he went into that war. So here are his two medals from the South African War on this side, and the two medals from World War I over here. He was in the Manchester Regiment. Here's a pin from his uniform. Here's something that was kind of neat. Every veteran that survived the South African or Boer War were encouraged to, and many joined the South African War Veterans Association. Each year they had Christmas parties. This is one of his Christmas invitations that he got many years after he served in that war. My dad was a veteran of World War II in the RCAF, the Royal Canadian Air Force. And I have a couple things to show you from his time in the war. He worked in the Lancaster bomber. He was a wireless operator in the Lancaster bomber. Here's his trunk banner that very proudly proclaims RCAF and him being a member of that. My dad hails from Amherstburg, Ontario, and here's his kit bag that he was issued, and all your sort of precious belongings when you were sent off went in one of these bags, and you kept it with you, your personal belongings. And there's his kit bag. Here's a picture of my dad in his uniform, very proudly displaying his RCAF uniform. Here's the two RCAF pins that were on his uniform as well. 2 medals that he earned while serving for our country in the RCAF. And here's a picture I had redone, and that's my dad there, my late grandmother, and there's my grandfather there. So one other interesting story is that my grandfather was very passionate, like all veterans of our service. They feel the need to serve our country out of a duty and a sense of moral right, and doing what's right for not just for themselves and their families, but their communities and their country. My grandfather, my father certainly had that attitude about them. My grandfather served in the Boer War. He served in World War I. When it came time for World War II, he didn't ask. He basically told my dad, "You're definitely serving. You're not going to get out of this." He accompanied my dad to the recruiting office, and when my dad had signed up and it was all set for him to go off and serve in the Air Force, my grandfather stepped up to the recruiting table, and he was well along in years at this point, and the gentleman at the recruiting table asked him, "Can I do something for you, sir?" And he says, "Yes, I'm here to serve." And he diplomatically informed my grandfather, "Well, we normally target individuals a little bit younger than yourself." My grandfather said, "I'm not leaving this recruiting hall until I get an assignment." So the recruiting officer and his colleague huddled with their manager, and they came out and said, "Well, sir, thank you for your service, and we will give you the job of collecting scrap metal," and because metal was very precious at that time to make munitions and make equipment. And so he was given the job, if you will, to serve by collecting scrap metal to be used by plants that made equipment and munitions for the war. And that was his job. So technically, my dad would tell me that Grandpa served in 3 wars: the South African Boer War, World War I, and World War II. So that's my unique story. It's one that I want to pass along to my own children and other generations. And it's an important story. I feel privileged to be connected directly to people like George Herbert Horrobin, my dad, Alfred Horrobin, my grandfather, for which my middle name is named after. And they're precious to me, even though I didn't really remember meeting my grandfather because he died when I was very young. His memories and his service to our country and the Allied forces will always be with me. Thank you.